It's all yours, brother. Come on in.
Oof. The first time I think I've ever gotten a thumper stumper crown. I got one. I'm in. I'm in the cool club now. Um, Thank you, Eric. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you to all you weirdos who keep coming to hear me over and over again. I don't know what's wrong with you guys. There's got to be something better to do on a Sunday night. The Knicks are playing, right? Like that's how you know I love Eric because the Knicks are playing and I'm here, right? Um, My name is Matt. I'm a recovered alcoholic. And when I say recovered, I don't say that because it makes me better than or more spiritual or cooler than or part of some exclusive club within the club. I say that because that's what the big book promised me, was that I wasn't going to struggle with the seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Um, I came here for the sole purpose of making the pain stop. Um, I came here because I wanted the heat off my back. I wanted the world to think that I was doing something altruistic to try and make myself a better person. And I wanted to stop feeling the way that I did. And I thought that the first step to do that was that I needed to stop drinking. And when I got here, what you guys offered me was a spiritual experience. And on the other side of that spiritual experience, a byproduct that came of it was that I don't want to drink. I don't think about drinking and I don't think about not drinking. It's just not a thing. Right. And so, Eva, stay here long enough and you align yourself with the right people and you keep an open mind, if you can be willing, that there is a freedom that you never thought possible available to you. There is an experience here that if I tried to put it in words, it would cheapen it. Right. I took a really good friend of mine through the steps a few years ago. And after we finished his fifth step, that he took him like 2 months to write a fourth step. Don't ever take 2 months to write a fourth step. It took him 2 months to write a fourth step, and I listened to his fifth step on a Sunday afternoon, and I gave him the instructions that the big book said. I said, go sit and for an hour and meditate on the first five proposals, see if you left anything out, see if you're ready and willing to go forward, and then when you're done, we'll talk about six and seven. And he calls me. He went in my he lives in my neighborhood, and in my neighborhood there's a maritime college that the state of New York runs. And it's on this beautiful peninsula right underneath the bridge. It's a gorgeous campus. It does not feel like you're in the Bronx. And he went there and he rode his bike there and he sat by the water to do the meditation. And he calls me when he was done and he was in tears. And he says, Matt, I can't explain what I'm feeling right now. I said, good, don't try. Go enjoy it. Bye. Call me later. Because I can't put words to the spiritual experience. I can't put words. And I can be pretty damn eloquent. Sometimes I even might fancy myself a poet. And I can't put words to the experience of an encounter with God one on one intimately. It just doesn't, words don't do it. And so a little bit about me. My sobriety date is May 19th, 2016. Actually, the last time that I spoke here was on my anniversary earlier this year when I celebrated 8 years. My home group is the world famous greatest meeting in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, the Bronx Big Book Study. If you have not come to that meeting, you should, because we it comes on right after this one, 9 o'clock, 365 days a year. We read the big book line by line. Um, and I'm going to tell you guys the story of how that came about. I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I don't ever know what I'm talking about. I don't come here with a can talk. I don't have bullet points for you. I say a prayer before I get up here. It used to be something really simple as God, you're up. The one that I've been fancying lately is God, quiet my mind and open my heart. Because I know that when I'm thinking from my mind about what I'm going to say, what I'm planning to sound good or sound spiritual, when I'm trying to impress you, that's not going to do anybody any good. What I want to talk about is my encounter with God. That's my goal. That's my purpose from this podium, is to talk about how I came and how I nurture and grow my relationship with God. Um, and the only reason that I know that Alcoholics Anonymous exists uh, is because I used to go rock climbing. I still fancy myself a climber, although I haven't climbed much. 2004, maybe 2005. I was climbing with my friend Mike. Mike, just for, I'm gonna give you the end of the story. Mike just celebrated 20 years sober. So we can Tarantino it back to that car ride. And so Mike was my climbing buddy. I introduced him to rock climbing. And so I had all the equipment, I had all the experience, I had the deleting. Mike's job was to drive uh and make sure that I didn't die, which is belay, control the rope as I'm climbing ahead. And And the agreement was always we'd leave at the crack of dawn so we could climb from sun up to sundown. And this one particular day, Mike was like, "We got to cut out early," and I wasn't too happy about that. And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, I'm trying to get sober, and I got to make 90 meetings in 90 days," is what my sponsor told me. And I said, "Okay." And so we get in the car and we're driving home, and there's a blue book on the dashboard of his beat up old Nissan Frontier pickup truck. And so I pick up the big book and I start flipping through and I'm picking his brain and I'm like, "Dude, what's this all about? Like this sounds crazy." And he says about God. Now I don't know. I don't even think he had 30 days sober. And he says it's about God, Matt. He says, "I don't know much about it, but I know that you got to find a relationship with God, and that's the only way you're gonna get sober. It doesn't matter what you call God. It doesn't matter if you find God in a religion or don't. It doesn't matter what you call God. You just got to get to know God." Um, and I said, "Okay." 10 years later, my life had fallen apart. And my life had fallen apart because I'm an alcoholic, not because I drank alcohol. Right? My life fell apart because I suffer from alcoholism, and the things that make me an alcoholic uh, came to light because I tried to treat my own spiritual condition, my own human condition, my own existence with alcohol because I had no idea how to handle adult life. I had no idea how to be a dad. I had no idea how to tell you that I was going to do something and actually follow through. I had no idea how to keep commitments in relationships. I had no idea how to love, how to empathize, how to be patient, how to be compassionate. I had no understanding of human emotions, none whatsoever. I was a child in a man's body and a scared little boy at that. And everything about me would tell you that if you got anywhere close to beneath the surface, but on the outside, I could pretend really well. And most of that pretending involved me being a pathological liar, me telling you whatever you wanted to hear to get what I wanted. It looked a lot like me, lying at the bar to impress the guys, lying in any group of men. I didn't know how to relate to men. I didn't know how to have male relation. Mind stopped was drinking, and I think I didn't even realize how noisy my mind was till it quieted down for 5 minutes. And in 2012, I went to a meeting um, because I knew that that's where you go when you have a drinking problem. And I went to a meeting because my mom said, "I think you have a drinking problem." And my mom was all I had. My dad was a crackhead who got caught up in the crack epidemic of the 80s, and he was murdered a few blocks from my home a month before my seventh birthday. I don't need any sympathy for that. It was a long time ago. I've worked through my resentments. I've worked through the harms that I've caused his name and his legacy over the years. I've forgiven him and I've forgiven myself. What I still struggle with and what I need sympathy for is that when the old man kicked the bucket, he left me alone in a house with 9 women, 9 of them. I was raised in a coven. And they hate when I say that joke, by the way. They also hate when I tell my mother that she was the queen mother, the matriarch of the coven. Um, and so I didn't know how to relate to men. So when I became an adult and at the time I was working as a paramedic in the city of New York. I was a college graduate. I thought I was hot shit. And here alcohol is taking my life, taking the quality of my life away from me faster than I can keep up. And my mom, whose alcoholic mother died from a heart attack when I was 5, whose man was murdered because of his life in the drug world when I was 6. Uh, and my cousin Becky, there was only six of us cousins on my father's side. She took my cousin Becky in because her mom was also on drugs, and Becky died from AIDS that she got from IV drug use. And when my old man died, she picked up a second job as a nurse in a drug rehab. And so if anybody had the pedigree to spot an alcoholic, it was my mom. And I argued a million reasons why I was an alcoholic, but I found myself in a meeting nonetheless. And in that meeting, I introduced myself and I said that if I knew for sure that if my girlfriend would act the way I needed her to act, that I wouldn't drink the way that I do. And I believe that. I believe that I even ran that same script again at a men's meeting, thinking I had gone to the He-Man Woman Haters Club like little rascals, and nobody applauded in that meeting either. And and then I stormed out of the meeting. And I tell this story because it's really important. And a guy chased me out. He told me, he said, "Matt, if you don't get a sponsor in this deal, you're screwed." And what went through my head was all of these external accomplishments that I had made. I was a college graduate. I was in the best shape of my life. I was trained to be a firefighter, right? I wore a uniform for the city of New York. I had a nice car. I had a pretty girlfriend. I took care of my kid. I had to the delusion that because I was able to apply intellect and will and discipline and manipulation and smarts and all of these other things to certain areas of my life, that somehow, some way I'd be able to do this thing on will and discipline alone. And that just doesn't, it's not applicable here. Right. Because the problem is not that I don't have will or discipline. The problem that I have when I find myself here is that I don't have access to power. So it doesn't matter how much will and discipline I can muster up for other areas of my life. I just can't seem to do it here. And that was 2012. I told you that my sobriety day was May 19, 2016. I came in and out for years. In 2015, I came here because I really wanted to be here. Um, because the course of my drinking looked a lot like me saying, if it interfered with this or that, I'll get help. Drawing a line in the sand and then stepping over that line and drawing another one. And I came here in 2015 and I wanted to be sober so bad. I wanted to stop disappointing people. I wanted to stop feeling the way that I felt. Um, and I wanted to be the dad that my kid needed. When I got here in 2015, by that point, I was a single dad. My son's mom had been in and out of his life for many years. And at this point, she was out. And it was my 31st birthday. It was a Tuesday. It was my day one, March 10th, 2015. And I took my son to a jiu-jitsu class that Saturday that I've been promising to take him for a long time. And I, my son's built like a lollipop. He's still built like a lollipop. He just has broccoli hair, like all the kids now, right? They all have the broccoli curls. And we walk into this jiu-jitsu class and they give him a practice uniform for his first day and they pair him up with this chubby little yellow belt. And she picks him up off of his feet and she slams him on that big old Ecuadorian waterhead of his. And before he can even like get his bearings, she picks him up and she slams him again. And then this time when his head hits the mat, he looks up at me. He's got the biggest, stupidest smile I've ever seen on his face. And I start crying. Bill talks about for a moment I needed and wanted God. And he came in that moment. I understood that I needed to get sober if I was going to be this kid's dad. I needed to get sober if I was going to show up for him. I needed to get sober if I wasn't going to be my dad. And I was drunk that Friday. Right. And the book talks about frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. The love of my kid is never going to be enough. His mom begged me over the years to not drink. My mom begged me over the years not to drink. The guys at work begged me to not to drink, telling me all of these different things. And it's never going to be enough. If I don't have a spiritual experience, now I find myself coming to meetings and lying about my day count. And something happens with the love that you guys offer me. Dishonesty starts to taste funny in my mouth, and I need to be honest with the people who keep welcoming me back every time I come in. I say I got 3 days back, 5 days back. Something happens when I sit a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and I hear somebody pour their heart out and talk about all the vulnerable stuff that I was never able to. And it gives me license to be me and it gives me license to be vulnerable. And I start doing that and I walk into meetings. And there was a guy who I found out after the meeting that lived next door to me. And I was in a meeting on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, which is about 15 miles from where I live. And I'm sitting in the meeting and I'm itching. I'm itching to raise my hand and say something spiritual that I heard at another meeting and regurgitate it like it was my own original thought because I love people coming up to me after the meeting be like, "Wow, man, you got 20 days. You sound amazing." I really wanted you guys to like me. And instead of that coming out of my mouth, I raised my hand and I said, "Hey guys, I got 4 days. I've been lying to you this whole time." And I remember Leroy, who never said a word. He puts his hand on my forearm. He was sitting right next to me. He puts his hand on my forearm and he says, "That's good, Matt. That's good, Matt. You got to get honest, Matt." And I was the kind of person who would take a lie to the grave rather than admit that I lied. And things started to open. I started to crack open just enough. And I was going to these meetings and I was doing what you said. I'd even made it a couple of times all the way up to step 7, but was never willing to start making amends. And I wasn't ever completely honest on my 5th steps with my sponsor. And you guys, not you guys, definitely not you guys, but people in Alcoholics Anonymous were giving me the advice of just don't drink and go to meetings. They were telling me to put the plug in the jug. They were telling me to just join the no matter what club. And the truth is, and you guys have heard this before, that if I could just not drink and go to meetings, I wouldn't need to go to your stupid meetings. Right. The only no matter what club I'm ever going to be a part of is that I'm going to drink no matter what. That is the truth of my step one experience. And in May of 2016, days before I left for treatment, I'd been up for 4 days at the end of a 4 month run. And I couldn't get out of bed. The entire time that I was on every run that I'd been on, my son, who at this point was 6, had been gone to school with a clothes pressed and belly full of warm food and homework done and ready to go and attack the day. And there was no appearances that his dad was suffering terribly from alcoholism. And this morning, I just didn't have the courage to do battle, wasn't there. And those lines that I drew in the sand every time, those lines that I drew, the final line was always, I wasn't going to be my dad. I was not going to be my dad. And I got up and I called his mom and I called my mom and I called my job. And 3 days later, I went to treatment. And all of the time that I spent in Alcoholics Anonymous, my sponsor was a big book sponsor. He made me go to his home group. His home group was a big book group. I could quote the big book. I knew how Alcoholics Anonymous work. I'm a joiner. I learned all your prayers. I learned all the cool things to say. I learned all the slogans. And I got to treatment and I decided as soon as I got there, I was going to tell you guys how Alcoholics Anonymous works. I was going to quote the big book because I understand it, right? Like I'm going to celebrate that I'm the undisputed chess champion of the rehab. Uh, and so my ego, needless to say, is a little bit persistent. Bob Darrell talks about the reconstructive abilities of the alcoholic ego. It is the most dangerous thing that we encounter once we put the drink down. And about a week into treatment, I got the hint that I needed to be plucked from society and to keep from killing myself and torturing everybody I loved in the process. That I should probably humble myself a little bit and just shut up. And I did that. And I learned what it meant to be an alcoholic. I learned that step one means I'm going to drink. I learned that I have this physical thing that non-alcoholics don't experience. That when I start drinking, I can't stop. I suffer from this unquenchable thirst for alcohol the minute it hits my lips. And it's deeper than that. It's not just a physical thing. That experience in and of itself is spiritual because everything that I've ever wanted becomes promised in the drink to come. And when that drink comes, it's in the next one. And then I find that that's not really my problem because if drinking too much is my problem, then just not drinking is the solution. But I suffer from this obsession to drink. I have this mind that tries to convince me with no evidence to support it that I'm going to be able to handle myself like a gentleman. It convinces me that a drink is a good idea, that the very thing that is killing me is going to solve the discomfort that I'm feeling big or small. And I bring all of this back from treatment to my sponsor and I say, I get it. I'm powerless. Physical craving, mental obsession. He says, cool, that's not your problem either. And I'm like, all right, well, what are we talking about? He says, well, your whole life is unmanageable. And I started rattling off those things that I rattled off in the elevator in my head, all these external things that I seemed to be managing that made my life to me seem manageable. And he goes like this, I'll never forget. He points right to his solar plexus. He says, yeah, but what about your insides? And he reads off the bedevilments and he has this, and I have this experience. So you're having trouble with personal relationships, controlling your emotional nature, feeling of uselessness, or you're full of fear. And it's like, check, 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 check. And he's like, guess what, kid? He says, and that's why you drink, because that's what you're dealing with. And I walk out of that session with him like crushed. And I tell you that if your step one experience doesn't crush you a little bit, go back and have another one because it's a pretty scary and terrifying diagnosis. What powerlessness and unmanageability really like. So when I start to realize that I don't have any choice in the matter, I'm going to put the drink in my face. Right. And I go to a meeting that night, 10 p.m. meeting, and I hear my now friend Chris. I was just at his wedding. He just celebrated 11 years sober. And Chris says, when I was out there trying to kill myself, God brought me here. So now that I'm here, why would I question for a second if God's going to see me through? And that, which I only understood in retrospect, was the beginning of this step two experience for me. Because what happens is I start to realize I didn't bring me here. I didn't make a decision to stop drinking any more than I made a decision to drink. I was separated from alcohol, like Bill talks about, like a lot of people introduce themselves, right? I was struck by grace. Because I'll tell you, I have an atheist friend who used to tell me, Matt, you still go to those meetings. You don't need to go to those meetings. You understand that one day you made a decision to stop drinking, you stop drinking. And I said, Jules, yeah, I made a million decisions to stop drinking, and 1,000,001 times I found myself drunk. I don't have the power to do that. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting in a meeting and I'm 30 something days sober. And I hear this man say something that makes just enough sense to me that I'm sitting in that chair because for whatever reason, God put me there. And if I'm going to make it through, God's going to do it. I can't. And I start that experience by subtraction, this addition by subtraction. In the vacuum of me not being a viable solution to the problem, I create just enough space for God to make a beginning in my life. And in the beginning, it's a really big question. God is everything or else he's nothing. What is my choice to be? Me and Alex have this thing where we'll call each other with whatever's heavy on the mind, right? And then like halfway through the unloading and the venting, one of us will say to the other one, you know what? God is everything or he's nothing. Because we realize halfway through that we're trying to carry a thing that only God can carry, right? And my sobriety, my recovery, all of these things, the idea that I'm not going to obsess about a drink, that I'm not going to want to put a drink in my face, that there's a clear path to freedom from my own bondage is only a thing big enough for a God that's big enough for me. And so I make my beginning. Right. And I go to my sponsor's kitchen and we hit our knees and we say the third step prayer. And he starts to explain to me what the third step even means. And in the beginning, I didn't know. I didn't know like what playing God was. I didn't know. And I've gone through the step three and he had me meditate on each one of the roles that I'm going to surrender to allow God to play in my life. And I'll tell you, if you haven't done that, it's a pretty powerful one. Because if I ask myself, if I'm going to quit playing God, if I'm going to quit trying to direct the show, if I'm going to stop writing you your script and writing you a role into my life and assigning myself a role in yours, then guess what? What's God going to do now? Well, if God's the principal and I'm his agent, then that means that I take my assignments from God. That means when I go out in the world, I represent God. What does that look like? If I ask myself right now, right here, at whatever time it is on this Sunday evening, how do I look when I go out in the world? Am I representing myself as an agent of God? Right. It says God's going to be the director, which means that I just play the role that he assigns. It said God's going to be my employer. So that's no wonder by the time I get halfway through step nines, it tells me I'm not going to have any fear of economic insecurity because as long as I'm doing my job, which is what the promises tell me that if I do my job, God's going to do his job, then I don't have to worry about my resources. God's going to give me exactly what I need to get through whatever I need to get through, whether that be financial or otherwise. And the one that was the deepest and the most profound for me was God's going to be my father and I'm going to be his child from a kid who didn't have one, from a kid who tried to find a father in every alpha male who crossed my path, whether that meant gangs in the street, right? I've got a tattoo on my shoulder that I got in a project apartment when I was 15, sitting next to a table full of guns and drugs because I just wanted to be a part of. I needed somebody to teach me what it meant to be a man. And at the time, my twisted sense of masculinity meant toughness and meant being in the street, right? And like I was part of the chess club. I was a straight A student. I was on the honor roll. Like I was a fraud everywhere that I went. And so when Pat tells me, I want you to meditate on this idea that God is your father and you are his child. And what that means, it means that I don't have to worry about being cared for or protected. That I start to understand because I have two kids. I have a 15-year-old who's in full 15ness. I choke on his cologne when I wake up in the morning, right? And I have to, so he runs track and I have to smell his sweaty track stuff, right? And all of the things. I have a 4-year-old who's the light of my life. And there is nothing that either one of them could do that could dim the love that I have for them in a million years. And if that the love that I have for them is a fraction of the love that God has for me, then I have to understand that I'm loved unconditionally. There isn't a thing that I can do to make God love me anymore. And I'll tell you guys, there isn't a thing that I can do to make God love me any less. But in order to gain access to this power, I have to remove movements, right? I mean, and if we simmer it down, I'm angry and I'm scared. And I'm angry because I don't agree with the way that reality is going because I have my own ideas about how it should go. Obviously, I've been playing God for a very long time, and as my role of God, I have this idea about how things should go. And when the world doesn't match my ideas, that pisses me off. And I make things about me that aren't about me. Imagine being resentful at a man who got murdered for being murdered, right? Resentful at a mom for the things when she fell short, when she was scrambling, trying to keep afloat a family of nine, which included her taking care of her own sister who had psychological problems and her sister's four daughters, right? Like, and I'm scared because I've tried so hard my entire life to control outcomes and I just can't. And right, and we if there's this book, and none of y'all, I don't care if y'all come for me. Y'all asked me to be the speaker of this meeting, and I'm going to talk about books that aren't conference approved literature because the book tells me to go look at other books and spiritual teachings. And there's a book by this woman named Louise Hay. It's called "You Can Heal Your Life," and she says that all fear boils down to the idea that I'm not enough. All of it, all of it. I'm going to lose what I have or not get what I want. Either way, the reason those both things are true in my mind is because I'm not enough. And I arrive at every single relationship I've ever been in with the only tools available to me are anger and resentment and all of the things that grow from those two things. So no wonder I hurt people. No wonder I harm people. No wonder I interfere with people's lives. Right? Like my selfishness and self-centeredness, this thing that I suffer from, and all of the things that grow from that starts out very early as survival skills and defense mechanisms, right? I was raised by the microphone and the microwave and the TV because my mom was working and everybody else had something better to do than care for what I was doing. But by the time I get here, by the time I'm 30, 31, 32, 35, those tools are obsolete. I no longer need those things to run through life. I no longer need to run through life thinking that everything's about me and in this like this worn out, outdated software in my mind that is constantly trying to protect me from the boogeyman. I find out when I do inventory that I am the boogeyman. I manufacture all of the pain that I cause other people and all of the pain that I experience. And if I don't cause the pain that I experience, who can't relate to men, who doesn't know how to talk to men, be honest, look a man in the eye, give a firm handshake, not an honest one, has to sit with another man in step five and offer his truth. And that truth is is terrifying. That experience to me in the beginning was terrifying. It is no longer terrifying to me. I'll tell you that anybody who will listen, if there's anybody I know who's been through the experience the way that I have, I will call them on the phone. I'll call one person. If they don't pick up, I'll call the next person and say, listen, I need to get this inventory off to somebody. Can you listen? Because I don't want to live with that here. If the ultimate goal for me is less Matt, more God, then every time some Matt reveals itself, then I've got to put it on paper, I've got to examine it, and I got to share it with somebody, I got to offer it up to God in that exercise. And I learned about the patterns in the beginning, and there was some truth that happened when my sponsor says, you know, that's not who you are. Those are things that you've done, those are feelings that you've had, those are misperceptions you've lived by. I thought I was a sociopath when I got here. One of my old college professors who I told that to, he says, what does your sociopathology look like? I said, it hurts. I hurt people and I don't care. He says, you don't care? Then why are you talking to me about it? What do you do? I said, well, usually I go into a depression and I like get drunk and high and I watch Netflix for days on end. He says, yeah, sociopaths just hurt people and go on with their lives. They don't go into a drunken depression in their bedroom. Cut it out. Go to AA. So I did. And the very first time that I went through the fifth step, my sponsor sent me to do exactly what the book says to do, go sit for an hour. And he sent me to this park in his neighborhood. And and I sat in the park and I couldn't hear anything that was going on because I was in my head. And my first drink was when I was 12 at my mom's wedding with people who I didn't know because 80% of the people at the wedding were his family. We had just met my family from Puerto Rico a few years before that. We didn't listen to salsa music, which is what they were playing at the wedding. We listened to, I grew up on Motown and classic rock. And this guy was taking away my mom, the queen matriarch of my coven. And my stepbrother gave me a rum and coke and he told me he would fix me, and it did. And I was dancing and I was speaking my broken Spanish and I was hugging on the guy I hated. And I was able to become a part of life. And I sat in that park wondering where God fit into the equation of my recovery. If I'd been like this for 30 something years, how the hell was, and like immediately this vacuum popped in my head and I could hear the kids playing in the park. I'd had like the exact opposite experience of the wedding, was I was connected to you all in a moment's notice when I accepted God instead of accepting booze. And I became willing to do whatever I needed to do so that God could take these defects away from me. And I don't get to decide. God's going to use what he's going to use when he's going to use it. I don't get to decide. And I went through my amends after we'd done step 7, and I had some really profound experiences with moving into the willingness to repair the damage I've caused, and then having the experience of repairing the damage I've caused. Um, and we finished the steps in short order in about 7 months sober. A friend of mine named Danny says there's some really good big book studies up in Yonkers and in Scarsdale, which are suburbs north of the city. Shout out to Tony Z for Pathway to Power, being one of those groups. And I went up there and they were speaking a language that I didn't understand. And one night I went, and Roy T, if anybody's ever heard Roy T from India speak, he's a phenomenal speaker. And he just happened to be speaking at this big book meeting live. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know that he was this circuit speaker who had this really powerful message. All I knew was there was this very funny man with a very funny Indian accent making the big book sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. And I think he was reading on step 3. And in the 3 pages that he read over the course of the meeting, I had more notes in those 3 pages than I had in the rest of my book combined. And I came back to Danny and I said, why aren't we doing this in our neighborhood? And he said, we are now. Let's find a space. And so at 7 months sober, we set out to find a church that was going to house what we were going to call the Bronx Big Book Study. And it was Danny's idea to name it that. I said, you don't want to name it something cool like the Lunacy Commission, right? Or We Recover or something silly. He says, no, I want people to know exactly what they're going to get when they walk into the room. You're coming to the Bronx to get a big book study. I said, all right, Danny, let's do that. And we went to every church in the neighborhood. And the only night where we wouldn't be stepping on another meeting's toes was Wednesday. And I'm driving by and we couldn't find a church. And so uh, I'm driving by this catering hall that says we have weeknights available at a discount. And it's called Susan's House of Magic. And I walk inside. We were driving by on the fire truck and I asked the guys to pull over and I walk inside because being in uniform sweetens people over. And I walk in there and Susan herself is in there, and the place is covered wall to wall in mirrors, and it's got disco balls everywhere, and it's like decorated for like a baby shower. And I said, hey, we want to host an AA meeting here on Wednesday nights for an hour. We need the place for 2 hours. The Bronx Big Book Study was born, and we were born in Susan's House of Magic, and everybody showed up. And when I was in treatment, there was a guy named Chris there. And my second trip to treatment, I walked into his office and he said, why do you keep drinking? I said, well, I have a step 3 problem. I keep taking my will back. And he says, no, you have a step 1 problem because you keep drinking. I said, I have a step 3 problem. I understand I'm powerless and I understand that God's going to be the one that's going to restore me to sanity. I just keep making the decision. And he cuts me off in the middle of that. He says, if you know everything that you need to know, how about you get the hell out of my office? And I, and I stormed out of his office and he wound up years later being the opening speaker, the inaugural speaker for the Bronx Big Book Study. Chris D and his mom, Debbie D, both from Rockaway, New York. At the time, she had like 42 years sober and he had about 8 or 9. And it's a 2-speaker deal. And they came and spoke. And when Chris started reading from the big book, he started speaking something that I didn't understand. And after the very first meeting, I came up to him and I said, hey, Chris, I want what you have. He said, if you want to come up here and sound good when you're speaking at a big book study, just keep taking guys through the book and it'll happen. I said, that's not what I want. And I bothered him for months. And we asked him to come back because at the time we didn't have access to a huge like pool of speakers. We just started this deal. And he comes back a few months later and I said, Chris, I want what you have. And he says, all right, come to my house on a Saturday. And he lived in this really cool loft apartment overlooking Astoria Park. And I go to his house and he pulls out this big book that looks like there are more words written on the pages than printed on the pages. And he starts reading me these transcriptions. And he tells me that his sponsor had gotten this information from another guy who gotten this information from a guy in Colorado. And if you know how that story goes, it's right, it's Dan Sherman and Don Prince and all of these guys, and it becomes this big book awakening process. And Chris had me, if anybody knows anything about this, a workbook for this deal. And Chris had me listen to him transcribe everything and write it by hand. We would be in his house on Saturday mornings for 3 hours, but something happened. Something happened when he turned those statements into questions. Something happened when I start to see the big book come alive and it becomes this personal experience. Because what's going to happen, it wasn't preparing me so much for a deeper experience. Although that's what happened, what it was preparing me for was to offer somebody a clear path through the big book so that I could hold their hand just long enough to place it into God so that they would have no question but to find themselves in those pages. And the big book gives you ample opportunity to turn statements into questions. And by the time we got to step 4, this was my second time going through it. All of a sudden, in between the third and fourth columns, there becomes this thing, the realization, the realization that at some point or another in my life, I've done these things to other people, either that person or somebody else. And you know what happened in that moment, the very first time we spoke about the realization? I instantaneously forgave everybody I was resentful at. Shortly after that, I went to a retreat and it was a men's Matt Talbot retreat. And they did this whole workshop on resentment. And they said, I want you to sit for 15 minutes and meditate on somebody you're resentful at. 15 minutes digging through the bowels of my mind. And I could not come up with one person I had a single resentment against. If you don't think that you can be free from resentment, I promise you, you can. If you don't think that you can be free from fear, I promise you, you can. Right? If you think that those things are not possible, then you need to talk to God about how big you think he really is, because I promise you, he's bigger than you can imagine. And I've been through that work a few times. And later in my sobriety, did I really understand what it meant to live in step 10, to live there in this place where I'm watching for these defects, willing to repair damage that I caused instantaneously. Right? Not when it's convenient, right? Promptly means promptly. And the thing is that if I'm willing to watch, if I'm willing to live in a place daily of prayer, Bill calls it testing my thinking against the new God consciousness within. How connected am I really? Am I taking this thing with me throughout the day? Am I asking God, and this is one of my prayers constantly, if you've never tried this one, I promise you it's a game changer. God, help me to see them through your eyes. I was having a massive argument one time with my ex-girlfriend in my house. And for days on end, we just could not connect. And my go-to is my mouth. It is my weapon of choice. I can cut somebody down. I don't need to use my hands. I'm 220 pounds of muscle. I don't need to use my hands, but I will use my mouth. And every day I was coming in here and I was sitting right at this desk and I was shutting the door and I was saying, God help, God help, God help, God help. And I'd written down, somebody told me to say that prayer on this calendar, which is the calendar's still on like September, but it's covered in prayers. Right. And I say that prayer and I walk out into the living room and I promise you it was a profound experience, because what was standing in the living room shouting at me was not a 30-year-old woman. What was standing in the living room shouting at me was a little girl in an oversized t-shirt, and she was crying and she was scared. And I just held her and I hugged her and I understood that what she was experiencing had nothing to do with me. Do not discount the power of prayer. And in step 11, I nurture that, right? In step 11, we talk a lot. Yeah, it's the nightly review. At the end of the day, I look for how well I did step 10 throughout the day. And it's not about like this moral scorecard. I'm not looking at for like how well I did as a person. I want to look at how selfish I was and how many times I etched God out of my day. And then I ask God for forgiveness. In the way that I do that, if you've heard me say this before, I say, hey, God, there were a few times today I tried to do your job again and I still suck at it. And I wake up in the morning, consider my plans. I heard a guy in a meeting say this recently. He says, when I wake up in the morning and consider my plans, it's not my plans for what I'm going to do. It's my plans for who I'm going to be. Marty C said that. Who am I going to be? How am I going to avail myself, right, to help God's children and be of service? Not like I got to get the laundry done and I got this deadline to meet. God will handle all of that other stuff, right? And then I get to carry this message to you, right? Having had a spiritual experience from the previous steps, the only thing that I am tasked with doing is carrying the message to you here in meetings, carrying the message to the newcomer when he walks in to the room with two left shoes on and holes in his t-shirt, not knowing which way is up. I get to tell him a story about how I used to put alcohol in my mouth and drugs in my body all the time, and I didn't know how to stop. And now I have this really cool life. And let me tell you a story about how I got here and the God who made it happen. And it doesn't stop there. And I love to do that, right? Like I love my very first sponsee, my very first sponsee who spent years struggling with the fact that he spent the first 5 years of his son's life in and out of treatment and missed the first 5 years of this kid's life. Pandemic shut everything down. This guy was across the country taking this kid. He's a baseball player. He's an ace, this kid, Christian, taking him to every baseball field that was open that he could get a spot in. He shows up at my firehouse with 3 trophies. Two of them were from some little league in Pennsylvania he won. The other one was from a little league that he won when they came back here when all the fields opened back up. And the third one was for his father for getting Father of the Year. I tell him every time he would come to me crying, I don't deserve to be this kid's dad. I don't deserve this kid. I would tell him, you just keep praying. You just keep praying. And I didn't say a word to him or remind him of any of that. I looked at the trophy and I looked at him and I gave him the biggest hug ever. And I cried, not because I had anything to do with that, but because every time I take someone from the brokenness to the relationship with God, every time I usher them through that process, I get one more reminder that God is here and God is working, and what you guys are offering me here is real. And easy to sound spiritual for you guys for an hour. How am I showing up at work? How am I showing up at home? And she just moved into a new condo the same week. She had no idea how she was going to do it. I called every fireman I knew, and I got myself off for 2 weeks straight. And when I was driving her to the hospital, she says, are you going to be here when I wake up out of surgery? I said, yeah, I'll be there. She said, what about tomorrow? I have one day in the hospital before I go home Sunday. I said, I'll be here all day. We sat there, we played Uno, we hung out, we watched silly movies. The next day I took her home, set up her, and then she got crazy because I was there every day. And then she had me building stuff and painting stuff and doing this and doing that. And I'm making fun. I'm like, Ma, you listen, you pushing it, lady. And then there was one time that I'm spraying over a cabinet she had me painting. And she hobbles over with her walker and she's got tears in her eyes. She looks down at me. She says, I just don't know what I'd do without you, kid. There was She walked into my apartment, saw me drunk trying to cook, and the kitchen was a mess. She said, what the fuck happened to my son? Miracles happen here. And I was just FaceTiming my daughter just before the meeting. And she's obsessed with who's going to pick her up when. And so amicably, because you guys taught me how to be a man of integrity. And I have my daughter Monday through Friday. And so tomorrow is swimming lessons. And my mom's taking one of her friends to chemo a few times. So she has one night a week where she spends with my mom, and my mom is not picking her up this Tuesday, so she's picking her up tomorrow and taking her to swim lessons. And so Summer wants the breakdown for the week. And she says, who's picking me up Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, Saturday? I said, I'm picking you up Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. She says, Daddy, can we go to church? We've never been to church together, but we listen to worship music and we talk about God. And my sponsor said one day, I want you to ask her, just ask her, do you accept God into your heart? And one day we're sitting in the car. I said, baby, have you ever asked God to come into your heart? And she says, without skipping a beat, she says, oh, yeah, I did that already. I did that already. And then she asked me today, she says, can we go to church? I said, you want to go to church? She says, yeah. I'm not going to sing, but I want to watch them sing about God. I said, you ain't got to sing, baby, but we're going. It's a date. The other day, her mom sends me a video of her. She says, Daddy, I really wish I could give God a high five, but I think my hands are too small. I said, your hands are not too small, baby. Gotta give you a high five all day, every day. And if you need me to hold you up a little bit just so you feel like you can reach the sky, I got you. I ran in to get her a donut and she couldn't see me. She was mouthing something from the car with the window down. And I came out and I got in the car and we're driving off to swim lessons. And she says, Daddy, that's what I was singing when I couldn't see you. I was singing, I trust in God. How do I get there? How do I get to the place where my instinctual fear or discomfort is I trust?
Brother Matt, that was absolutely amazing.